On the morning of January 14, 1892, smoke was seen drifting from the roofline of the grandest hotel the Gilded Age had ever produced. The building had dominated the shoreline for barely a decade, a colossal structure of iron, glass, and brick that newspapers once called the most extraordinary resort in the Western Hemisphere. Hours earlier, its halls were filled with winter guests, bankers, industrial families, foreign visitors, many of whom had traveled hundreds of miles for the privilege of staying inside the architectural marvel that defined an era of limitless ambition. By midnight, it would be gone. Crowds gathered along the boardwalk, watching flames rise through the ornate towers that had symbolized a city's aspirations. Fire engines arrived too late. Water pressure failed. Wind carried sparks from roof to roof. The spectacle of destruction unfolded in full view of thousands who could do nothing but watch as the building that had cost a fortune, employed an army, and dazzled a generation was reduced to a smoldering frame of twisted metal. The hotel's founder, who had imagined a palace that would rival the great resorts of Europe, never witnessed its final hours. He had died believing he had secured the city's reputation for decades to come. What he could not have foreseen was the speed with which fire could erase a monument built to endure the ages. The story of how the hotel came to exist, and how it vanished, begins decades earlier, with a settlement that transformed almost overnight into a magnet for American wealth. The coastal town that would soon demand a monumental hotel had been little more than a cluster of wooden cottages and fishing shacks when the first travelers arrived in the mid-19th century. By 1880, its population had begun to swell. Rail lines connected it to Philadelphia, New York, and Washington, carrying unprecedented numbers of tourists to a shoreline once known only to locals. Bathhouses, restaurants, and entertainment halls multiplied. Developers purchased entire stretches of coastline. The town's modest hotels filled every summer, unable to accommodate the growing waves of wealthy families seeking ocean breezes and social visibility. Yet despite its rapid ascendancy, the town lacked a defining architectural symbol. Other American cities had already built theirs. New York had colossal hotels with marble lobbies and hydraulic elevators. Chicago's newest establishments boasted fireproof construction and electric lighting. Boston's finest hotels featured European decor, grand dining halls, and interiors finished in imported stone and rare woods. The coastal town had ambition, money, and visitors. What it lacked was a landmark. Local businessmen understood that a single structure could elevate the city's reputation from a regional resort to an international destination. Investors debated plans. Architects submitted sketches. Speculators imagined a building that would dwarf every hotel lining the Atlantic seaboard. But only one man possessed both the audacity and the financial reach to attempt such a feat. He had made his fortune not in tourism, but in infrastructure, railroads, steel, and urban development. He understood that money flowed toward spectacle, and he believed the future of American leisure required architectural statements as bold as its industrial achievements. When he announced his intention to build a hotel larger than any in the country, one capable of housing more than 1,000 guests and filled with the most modern conveniences the era could devise, the city's businessmen expressed equal parts excitement and disbelief. Construction began with a level of ambition that exceeded every estimate. An entire beachfront tract was cleared. Foundations were sunk deeper than any along the coastline. Brickworks across 3 states received contracts. Iron foundries worked around the clock. Supply lines stretched from New England to the Carolinas, delivering lumber, slate, glass, and machinery in a continuous stream. The hotel rose story by story, a monumental structure of towers, gables, and mansard roofs. Its immense central dome became visible miles offshore, a beacon for travelers arriving by sea. Inside, decorators installed velvet draperies, carved mahogany, and chandeliers that rivaled those of European opera houses. Gas jets illuminated corridors stretching hundreds of feet. Steam heat circulated through pipes hidden behind marble wainscoting. Electric call buttons allowed guests to summon service without leaving their rooms. By the time the final bricks were laid, the project had cost more than $1.5 million, an astronomical figure for its time. But when the doors opened, the investment seemed justified. Presidents stayed there. Railroad magnates hosted banquets in its dining halls. Political agreements were negotiated in its parlors. Newspapers celebrated its engineering, its scale, its extravagance. For a decade, it dominated the shoreline, the crown jewel of American resort culture. It seemed invincible, too large to fail, too modern to burn, too important to lose. But on a frigid January morning, a spark in the attic ignited dry timbers hidden behind walls. Gas lines fed the flames. Wind fanned them. And within hours, the Gilded Age's Grandest hotel, the building meant to secure a city's legacy, was gone. The fire that destroyed the hotel began so quietly that the first employees who saw smoke assumed it rose from the kitchen chimneys. Winter winds carried the haze upward in a thin gray ribbon, barely visible against the early morning sky. Nothing suggested catastrophe. Nothing hinted that the building which had stood as the embodiment of a city's confidence would not survive the day. Inside, guests slept beneath heavy quilts in rooms warmed by steam radiators. Servants moved through the corridors preparing for breakfast service. Night shift engineers monitored boilers in the basement, unaware that flames were already spreading 3 floors above them. No alarm rang. No warning sounded. The building's elaborate fireproofing, celebrated in brochures and advertisements, could not alert anyone to the danger forming behind its walls. The attic level, rarely visited except by maintenance crews, contained miles of dry timber framing. Gas pipes threaded through narrow passages. Ventilation shafts rose toward the roof. A small spark, likely from a malfunctioning flue or defective gas fixture, ignited the wood. Within minutes, fire spread upward into the roof cavities. Heat built rapidly, trapped beneath slate and sheet iron. The hotel's vast size, once its greatest strength, became a fatal liability. Flames moved invisibly behind plaster ceilings, racing across an entire wing before anyone realized the structure was burning. By the time a porter opened a door to investigate the smell of smoke, the attic was a tunnel of flame. He shouted for help. Staff ran to alert management. Bells were struck manually in hallways, rousing guests from sleep. Windows were thrown open as people tried to see where the smoke came from. The first fire engines arrived within minutes, horses steaming in the frigid air, but the response faltered almost immediately. Hydrants near the hotel produced only thin streams of water. Pressure failed again and again. Firefighters struggled to maintain a steady line as flames erupted through the roof, shooting skyward in roaring columns. What happened next would become part of the city's legend. The hotel's immense size and elaborate roofline created a natural draft that pulled oxygen through broken windows. Fire leapt from one architectural feature to the next: turrets, gables, dormers, each becoming a torch feeding the inferno. Slate shingles cracked and exploded. Decorative ironwork bent and fell in glowing fragments. Entire sections of the roof collapsed inward, sending embers billowing into the winter sky, where winds carried them along the boardwalk. By mid-morning, thousands of residents and visitors crowded the streets, unable to comprehend the scale of the disaster unfolding before them. They had always believed the hotel was indestructible. Advertisements had said so. Architects had insisted its engineering exceeded that of any building on the coast. Promoters had claimed it was fireproof. But iron and brick alone could not stop flames that originated deep within the structure and found unlimited fuel in the decorative woodwork that filled every hallway, suite, and parlor. Inside, staff raced from room to room knocking on doors. Guests grabbed trunks and clothing, some managing to escape with only coats and boots. Women and children were escorted down grand staircases, now thick with smoke. The hotel's elegant winter gardens, once celebrated for their tropical palms and sunlit promenades, became evacuation routes. Engineers shut down boilers as heat from the fire intensified. Housekeepers guided elderly guests across icy walkways to safety. Amid the chaos, an extraordinary scene unfolded in the main lobby. Musicians who had played for guests the evening before now assisted with evacuation. Wealthy families abandoned luggage worth fortunes. Porters attempted to carry out silver service sets, only to be ordered to save lives instead. The hotel's manager, standing beneath a chandelier he knew would soon collapse, directed the final departures until smoke forced him outside. The building still stood, but its fate was sealed. As flames spread through the upper floors, they reached the vast central dome that had been one of the hotel's defining architectural features. The dome's iron framework heated, expanded, buckled, and finally collapsed inward with a sound that witnesses described as a single, deafening roar. Thousands watched the destruction. Reporters wrote that the noise echoed across the shoreline like cannon fire. Firefighters, overwhelmed and hindered by failing water pressure, could do little to stop the inferno. Hoses sputtered. Ladders warped from heat. Men were forced to retreat as falling debris made the area around the hotel too dangerous to enter. The inadequacy of the city's water system, and the overconfidence that had allowed it, became undeniable. By afternoon, the once grand hotel had become a hollow shell, its walls glowing red in the winter light. Flames shot from windows on every floor. Decorative cornices crumbled and fell. Iron balconies, heated beyond capacity, snapped free and crashed into the smoking ruins below. Hours passed. The crowd remained. As daylight faded, the interior collapsed entirely, floor by floor, until only jagged brick walls and twisted beams remained. The spectacle shocked a nation that had believed the building almost immortal. How a hotel so celebrated for its modern engineering, praised for its fireproof construction, could be destroyed so completely in a single night became a question that haunted the city for years. The answer lay in the Gilded Age itself. The era demanded speed, spectacle, and scale. It rewarded ambition more than caution. It produced buildings so large, so ornate, so dependent on elaborate systems that even minor failures could trigger catastrophe. The hotel's destruction marked not just the end of a building, but the collapse of an idea, that progress alone could overcome nature, engineering, or human oversight. When the smoke cleared the next morning, residents returned to the site, staring at the ruins of what had been the city's pride. Reporters walked across scorched floor beams. Engineers took measurements in silence. Former guests picked through rubble, hoping to recover jewelry or trunks. Nothing remained of the hotel's glory. Only debris, charred iron, and a city suddenly forced to confront the fragility of its greatest symbol. In the days following the fire, the city struggled to make sense of what had happened. Newspapers published diagrams of the hotel's floor plans, attempting to pinpoint the ignition point. Engineers interviewed staff who had been on duty that morning. Fire officials defended their actions, insisting the water supply failures, not operational mistakes, had sealed the hotel's fate. Residents who had watched the inferno unfold returned again and again to the site, unable to accept that the grandest structure they had ever seen had vanished overnight. The scale of the loss extended far beyond the building itself. The hotel had been the center of the city's social and economic life, a year-round gathering place for business leaders, politicians, entertainers, and wealthy families. Banquets had been held in its dining halls, political alliances formed in its private parlors, and national attention drawn to the city because of its extraordinary architectural landmark. Its destruction left a void that could not easily be filled. Insurance adjusters arrived within a week. They documented melted beams, collapsed staircases, and brick walls warped by intense heat. They calculated losses to the structure, the furnishings, the artwork, the machinery, and the personal belongings of hundreds of guests. The estimates rose into the millions, numbers staggering for the era. But even those evaluating the ruins admitted privately that no financial compensation could replace what had been lost. The hotel had become more than a business. It had been a cultural symbol, a demonstration of America's ability to construct buildings on a scale that rivaled Europe's greatest resorts. As investigations unfolded, attention turned to the hotel's founder, a man whose ambition had reshaped the city's skyline. He had dreamt of a structure that would redefine leisure, combining luxury with technological innovation on a scale never attempted before. His engineers had assured him the building was safe. His architects had praised their own fireproofing methods. He had invested a fortune, believing that advances in construction, brick, iron, steam, and gas, had made catastrophic fires a relic of the past. He died years before the fire, convinced his creation would outlast him by generations. What he could not have predicted was that progress itself would betray the building. The very systems that had defined the hotel as a marvel of engineering, its miles of concealed piping, ventilation ducts, wooden framing hidden behind thick plaster, and complex roof structures, had created channels through which fire could travel invisibly until it was too late. The irony was not lost on anyone. What had been marketed as a triumph of modern safety, a model for future hotel construction, had been destroyed in less than 12 hours. City officials faced mounting criticism. Residents demanded answers about the failed water pressure. Fire brigades insisted the infrastructure had been insufficient for years, despite repeated warnings. Engineers argued that dense coastal developments required stronger hydrant systems and larger mains. Politicians promised reforms, but none of it could change the fact that the city's most iconic building had been sacrificed not by neglect, but by an overestimation of what 19th-century engineering could achieve. As the ruins cooled, attention shifted from what had been lost to what might replace it. Investors debated whether a new hotel could be built. Architects sketched early concepts, some modest, others even grander than the original. The city faced an uncomfortable question. Could it sustain another palace of such scale, or had the era of monumental resort hotels already passed? Railroad executives argued for rebuilding. Tourism promoters insisted the city needed a successor to restore its national prestige. But rising construction costs, insurance disputes, and uncertainty about fireproofing technology complicated every discussion. The site remained fenced off, a charred monument to the vulnerability of ambition. Meanwhile, stories emerged from survivors, guests who had escaped with seconds to spare, workers who had led families through smoke-filled corridors, firefighters who had risked their lives despite failing equipment. Among the most frequently retold accounts was that of a young woman who had arrived the night before the fire and spent her first evening admiring the hotel's grandeur. She described the massive lobby, the polished floors, the sweeping staircases, the stained glass panels glowing softly above the winter garden. Her awe at the building's beauty became part of the tragedy's emotional core. She would later say that she felt as though she had stepped into a palace designed to last forever, only to watch it collapse into ruin the next morning. Business owners near the hotel also felt the impact. Shops that had relied on the constant flow of visitors saw their income vanish overnight. Carriage drivers, porters, musicians, florists, and vendors all lost the steady work the hotel had generated. For them, the destruction represented not just the loss of an architectural wonder, but the disappearance of an economic engine that had supported hundreds of livelihoods. Despite the devastation, some observers found a strange sense of opportunity in the aftermath. They argued that the city now had a chance to reimagine itself, to construct buildings that reflected new standards of safety, efficiency, and design. The fire, they believed, signaled the end of the Gilded Age's indulgence and the beginning of a more modern era, one that valued durability over extravagance, engineering over ornament. But others disagreed. They insisted that the hotel should be rebuilt exactly as it had been, an act of defiance against the forces that had destroyed it. Newspapers published editorials calling for the restoration of the city's greatest symbol. Wealthy residents pledged support. Tourists sent letters urging reconstruction. The debate would continue for years. All the while, the ruins remained, a silent reminder of the day when the grandest hotel in America, the pride of a booming city, the architectural triumph of an ambitious era, was reduced to ashes before the eyes of thousands. Through the winter that followed, the ruins of the hotel drew constant visitors. Even in freezing wind, people stood at the edge of the fenced perimeter, staring at the twisted beams and hollowed walls. The devastation had a magnetic pull. Children pressed against the rails, while their parents pointed out where the great dome once stood, where the dining room had stretched the length of a city block, where the famous winter garden had drawn crowds every afternoon. What had been a symbol of luxury had become the city's most sobering lesson. Architects, engineers, and insurance investigators continued their examinations. They documented char patterns, measured the thickness of fire-damaged iron, and dug through debris looking for clues about how the flames spread so rapidly. Every photograph taken in those weeks captured the same haunting image: a vast skeletal frame, its grandeur erased, its emptiness echoing against the winter sky. By early spring, meetings began inside the city's business clubs. Investors, railroad executives, and land developers gathered in private rooms to debate the future of the site. Some argued for immediate reconstruction, a building even more advanced than its predecessor. Others, more cautious, urged restraint. They pointed to rising insurance premiums, growing skepticism about fireproofing technologies, and the economic uncertainties of a new decade. Yet the city's pride refused to accept that its defining landmark should remain a ruin. To lose the hotel permanently seemed an admission that the city's ambitions had been misplaced, that its rapid rise had been an illusion, and that the Gilded Age ideal of limitless progress had reached its limit. The pressure to rebuild grew stronger. By summer, multiple architectural firms had submitted proposals. Some envisioned a near replica of the original, complete with grand towers and a central dome. Others proposed modernized designs with cleaner lines, steel framing, and improved fireproofing. All attempted to balance public expectation with the harsh lessons of the fire. Engineers recommended fireproof materials throughout: steel beams encased in concrete, plaster-coated walls, fire doors, isolated utility shafts, and redesigned ventilation systems to prevent flames from traveling unseen. They urged the elimination of concealed wood framing, the very element that had fueled the destruction of the original. Financing remained a question. Insurance payouts covered only a fraction of the loss. Investors hesitated. Some believed the era of monumental hotels was fading. Others feared that the city could not support a structure of such scale without guarantees of year-round tourism. But those who understood the hotel's importance to the city's identity argued that its absence would send a message far worse than financial risk. The original hotel had not simply been a place to sleep. It had been a symbol of arrival, a statement that the city belonged among the great destinations of the East Coast and Europe. To remain without such a monument, they argued, would reduce the city's standing at a critical moment in its development. Throughout these debates, the ruins remained visible from nearly every major street. Smoke-stained walls and blackened ironwork cast long shadows at sunset, a constant reminder of what had been lost. Residents felt the absence not just economically, but emotionally. Where once there had been music, light, and constant activity, there was now silence. Summer tourism declined sharply. Visitors who had once booked rooms months in advance now chose other destinations. The absence of the hotel affected the entire region. Restaurants saw fewer patrons. Carriage operators made fewer trips. Retail shops recorded lower sales. The economic engine that had driven the city's growth for a decade had stopped abruptly. By autumn, the decision became unavoidable. The city needed the hotel back, not only as an economic force, but as a symbol of resilience. The hotel company's board convened in a meeting that lasted late into the night. When they emerged, they announced their decision. A new hotel would rise on the same site, larger, stronger, and more technologically advanced than the original. The announcement electrified the city. Newspapers published celebratory headlines. Residents gathered in bars and parlors to discuss what the new building might look like. Engineers began clearing the site almost immediately. What the fire had not consumed, demolition crews would remove. Steel that had once supported an architectural masterpiece was hauled away. Bricks were stacked for examination. Foundations were tested for structural integrity. Workers labored through cold winds, disassembling the ruins piece by piece. Despite the progress, the emotional weight of the original's destruction remained heavy. Former guests returned to the site, describing memories from visits years earlier: the lavish dinners, the orchestras, the sweeping ocean views from upper-floor balconies. They spoke of the electric thrill one felt when stepping into a building that seemed to contain the future itself. The city's newspapers published letters from across the country. Travelers who had once stayed in the hotel wrote about its grandeur, its service, its atmosphere of effortless elegance. Some compared its destruction to the loss of a national treasure. Others urged the city to rebuild with even greater ambition, believing that the new hotel could surpass anything constructed during the Gilded Age. As winter approached again, the city regained a sense of purpose. Its residents had watched tragedy unfold, but now they watched progress return. The empty shell of burned iron was gone. The site had been cleared. Surveyors measured the ground. Architects worked in offices late into the night, drafting plans for a hotel that would represent not only the height of luxury, but the lessons of engineering failures made visible in the ashes of the original. The city understood that what rose on that shoreline would define not just its skyline, but its identity for the next century. The original hotel had been a symbol of ambition. The new one would need to be a symbol of endurance. As the new century approached, the vision for the replacement hotel grew increasingly ambitious. The architectural drawings circulating among investors and city officials showed a structure far more disciplined than its predecessor. Cleaner lines, stronger materials, reduced ornamentation, and a silhouette that suggested permanence rather than extravagance. The era of elaborate Victorian towers and sprawling wooden frameworks was ending. A new architectural language was emerging, one shaped by steel, concrete, and an understanding of fireproofing that had been painfully earned. The design retained the grand scale expected of a leading American resort. There would be hundreds of rooms, wide corridors, sunlit parlors, and sweeping dining halls. But none of it would rely on combustible materials. Steel columns would rise from bedrock. Floors would be poured in thick concrete. Stairwells would be enclosed in fire-resistant masonry. Mechanical shafts would be isolated and reinforced. Every element of the building was reconsidered, revised, and recalculated with the memory of the Great Fire as the guiding force. The city watched the planning closely. Residents had been shaken by the speed of the original hotel's destruction. They demanded reassurance that the new building would not suffer the same fate. Engineers held public demonstrations of new fireproofing methods. Architects described the structural redundancies built into the design. Investors emphasized that the rebuilt hotel would be one of the safest in the nation. a necessary promise in a time when fire disasters haunted the American imagination. By the summer of the new century, construction began. Steel beams arrived by train, unloaded in massive bundles that lined the streets. Riveters set to work, sending the sound of hammering across the coastline. Cranes rose above the boardwalk. Foundations were poured, deep and wide, far stronger than anything attempted for the original hotel. For months, the city echoed with the clatter of construction, the scent of hot metal, and the sight of steel rising story by story into the sky. Residents who had known the original hotel waited eagerly for their first glimpse of the new one. Tourists returning to the city stood along the fences surrounding the construction site, trying to imagine how the skeletal frame before them would become the next great American resort. The absence of the old hotel's elaborate cupolas and gables surprised some, but most understood the change. The world was different now. A new era demanded different architecture. Workers labored through blistering summers and freezing winters. The hotel's steel skeleton took shape rapidly, its 9 stories forming a strong, rectangular outline against the sky. Concrete floors were poured. Masonry walls rose. The building grew not outward as the original had, but upward, a deliberate shift away from Victorian horizontal sprawl toward a more dignified and enduring presence. The interior design team worked in parallel. They envisioned grand public spaces filled with light, air, and elegance. Unlike the dark, heavily ornamented Victorian parlors of the first hotel, the new spaces would be restrained and luminous. Marble would replace wood. Glass would replace drapery. Structural arches and columns would provide grandeur without excess. The central dining hall, destined to become the hotel's signature room, would be a cathedral-like space capped by a glass ceiling made of tens of thousands of pieces of leaded glass. Everything reflected a new philosophy: permanence over display, engineering over ornament. The hotel opened in a flurry of civic celebration. Newspapers published long accounts of its construction, praising its designers, its materials, and its promise to redefine American hospitality. Visitors who had mourned the loss of the original building lined up to see the new one. They walked through a marble lobby, past massive chandeliers, and into the great dining hall, where light poured through the glass ceiling in shimmering patterns. They commented on the sense of calm, the elegance, the confidence the new hotel projected. The city regained its identity. The destruction of the original hotel had been a catastrophic blow, but the new hotel symbolized resilience, a reminder that even the greatest tragedies could be met with new ambition. The rebuilt structure occupied the same footprint, but it represented a different era entirely. The Gilded Age had favored spectacle and ornament. The new century demanded strength and longevity. In the years that followed, the hotel became a destination for presidents, diplomats, performing artists, and business leaders. Major political addresses were delivered in its halls. Banquets honored national and international figures. Writers described its dining room as one of the most beautiful public spaces in the country, a place where the past and future met beneath a canopy of glass. Yet despite its glory, the memory of the original hotel never faded. Older residents continued to tell stories of its vast winter gardens, its ornate towers, its electric excitement on summer evenings. The new hotel was grand, but the old one had been legendary, a symbol of a lost era when ambition seemed limitless and the dangers of scale were not yet understood. The rebuilt hotel endured for decades. It survived storms, economic downturns, and shifts in American tourism. Its owners expanded, renovated, modernized, and adapted. It became part of the city's history, woven into the civic identity as firmly as any public building or landmark. But the shadow of the fire lingered. Engineers continued to study the event as a cautionary tale. Architects referenced the destruction in lectures. Historians wrote of it as one of the defining calamities of the Gilded Age. The original building's swift destruction, in the face of supposedly modern fireproofing, became a study in the limits of 19th-century engineering. And yet, the rebuilt hotel prospered. Guests returned year after year. Families celebrated generations of milestones in its halls. Political leaders chose it for speeches and ceremonies. Artists performed in its ballrooms. The structure became not just a replacement, but a testament to the city's resolve, a living reminder that loss could be transformed into renewal. As the decades progressed, the hotel's reputation expanded far beyond the region. Travelers from across the United States considered it an essential destination, not merely for its architectural beauty, but for the atmosphere it cultivated, an air of stability and refinement that contrasted sharply with the rapid, sometimes chaotic transformation of the surrounding city. Newspapers published glowing accounts of its service. Guidebooks called it indispensable. Artists sketched its facade. Photographers captured its interiors for magazines that celebrated American design. Inside, the great dining hall remained the building's centerpiece. The glass ceiling, composed of tens of thousands of pieces, filtered sunlight each morning into soft patterns that drifted across the marble floors. Guests described the experience of taking breakfast beneath the shimmering canopy as something close to ceremonial, a quiet ritual that marked the hotel as a space set apart from ordinary life. In the evenings, light from the chandeliers reflected against the ceiling, giving the entire room a warm, golden glow. The hotel's lobby, with its polished stone and high arches, became an unofficial meeting place for the city's influential figures. Business agreements were negotiated in its corners. Entertainers gathered there after performances. Politicians arrived with entourages. Every day, its marble floors bore witness to conversations that shaped the city's future. It was said that if one wanted to understand the direction of the region's economy, one needed only to sit in the lobby for an afternoon and observe who spoke with whom. The reborn hotel gained a reputation for discretion. Staff members operated with a level of professionalism that bordered on ritual. They knew the habits of long-term guests, the preferences of visiting dignitaries, the protocols required for presidents and international delegations. Their ability to maintain privacy made the hotel the preferred location for political conferences, diplomatic discussions, and high-profile business negotiations. In an era when the press increasingly sought access to public figures, the hotel became a sanctuary where privacy could still be preserved. During the First World War, the hotel hosted events to support relief efforts. Its ballrooms filled with volunteers organizing supplies for soldiers. Charity dinners raised funds for medical units abroad. The hotel became a symbol of civic unity, a place where the community came together not just for celebration, but for service. The spirit of resilience that had guided its reconstruction found new expression as the city navigated global uncertainty. The 1920s ushered in a period of renewed prosperity. Jazz orchestras performed in the ballrooms. Fashionably dressed guests filled the dining hall for lavish evening dinners. The hotel embraced modernity, installing new electrical systems, updated telephone exchanges, and improved heating. But even with its renovations, the building retained its original dignity. Its architecture, shaped by the lessons of the Great Fire, stood apart from the exuberance and excess that defined the decade. As the Great Depression unfolded, the hotel faced challenges but remained a symbol of continuity. While many businesses closed, the hotel kept its doors open. Visitors decreased, but those who stayed continued to value its stability. The dining hall, which had once been the stage for opulent celebrations, now hosted more modest gatherings. The city turned inward, focused on survival. Yet the hotel persisted, its presence a reminder that endurance, not extravagance, defined its era. During the Second World War, the hotel again became a site of national importance. Military officials used its meeting rooms for strategy discussions. Foreign envoys stayed in its suites during diplomatic engagements. Servicemen on leave filled the lobby, exchanging stories beneath the chandeliers. The building's owners understood the weight of the moment and adjusted operations to support the wartime effort, offering space for government use and hosting events that strengthened morale. In the post-war years, the hotel entered a new phase of prosperity. Economic growth brought travelers from around the world. The city expanded. Highways stretched outward. Air travel increased, bringing international guests who regarded the hotel as a piece of American heritage. Its reputation for elegance remained intact, and its architectural restraint, once viewed as a response to tragedy, became an admired example of early 20th century design. By the 1960s, preservationists recognized the hotel as a landmark. Architectural historians spoke of its influence on American hotel design, noting how its fireproof construction had become a model for later developments. They pointed to its steel framework, its concrete floors, its enclosed stairwells, and its mechanical systems as evidence of engineering foresight. The building's very existence had changed the industry, ushering in new standards that shaped countless structures nationwide. But time introduced challenges. Electrical systems aged. Plumbing needed modernization. The glass ceiling, exposed to decades of weather, required repair. The building's owners faced mounting pressure to renovate, yet any renovation carried the risk of damaging the historic elements that defined the hotel's identity. Engineers were brought in to develop plans that balanced preservation with modernization, ensuring the building could continue operating without compromising its architectural significance. Renovations began in stages. Rooms were updated with modern amenities. Mechanical systems were replaced. Fire safety was enhanced yet again, integrating 20th century innovations with the lessons learned from the building's original destruction. Despite the scale of the work, the hotel remained open through most of the upgrades, a testament to the staff's ability to maintain service amid constant construction. Visitors continued to arrive. Presidents stayed in its suites. Diplomats met in its parlors. Business leaders filled its conference rooms. Families returned generation after generation, making the hotel part of their own histories. The building had become more than a symbol of resilience. It had become a living archive of the city's evolution. Yet the memory of the Great Fire never faded completely. Older residents still told stories of the original hotel, speaking of its towering roofline, its lavish interiors, and the night it fell in a blaze seen miles away along the coastline. They remembered the shock, the crowds, the helplessness. To them, the new hotel was not just a structure, but a promise kept, that the city would never surrender to tragedy. By the late 20th century, the hotel stood as one of the few surviving monuments of its era, a structure that had witnessed more than a century of American transformation. It had survived the end of the Gilded Age, 2 world wars, economic collapse, social upheaval, and the complete reshaping of the nation's architecture, culture, and identity. Yet despite these changes, the hotel remained anchored to its original purpose, to serve as a gathering place for those who shaped the world around it. Its corridors bore the footsteps of presidents, foreign dignitaries, artists, innovators, and ordinary travelers seeking the same sense of grandeur that had drawn visitors since its opening decades earlier. The building became a study in continuity, the way architecture can preserve the memory of an era long after the world that created it has vanished. With each passing decade, the hotel's place in the cultural imagination deepened. Documentaries were filmed in its halls. Historians wrote detailed accounts of its origins. Students visited on architectural tours. Preservationists celebrated it as a triumph of early 20th century engineering. Its longevity became its most remarkable feature, A building originally conceived as a replacement for a tragedy had outlived nearly every other landmark of its time. But age brought new vulnerabilities. In the 1980s, engineers evaluating the structure discovered seismic risks that earlier renovations had only partially addressed. Advances in geological science revealed the region's susceptibility to earthquakes more clearly than ever before. The hotel's steel frame, strong enough for its time, required reinforcement. Its foundations needed strengthening. Its mechanical systems, though updated several times, required modernization to meet new safety standards. A renovation on a massive scale became inevitable. The owners made the difficult decision to close the hotel temporarily, an announcement that sent waves of concern through the city. Residents feared the closure might become permanent. Some worried the costs of restoring the aging structure would outweigh its economic viability. Others argued passionately that the hotel must be preserved at any cost, that its cultural significance outweighed financial concerns. Preparations began in the winter. Workers emptied the building floor by floor. Chandeliers were removed and crated. Marble columns were wrapped in protective padding. The great glass ceiling of the dining hall, a masterpiece composed of tens of thousands of pieces, was painstakingly disassembled, each pane catalogued and stored. For the first time in nearly a century, the hotel stood silent, its iconic spaces stripped bare, its future uncertain. Engineers moved in next, mapping every inch of the building. They cut into walls to examine steel joints. They tested concrete slabs for strength. They studied old blueprints and compared them to the physical structure. The scope of work required became clear. The hotel needed a full seismic retrofit, complete replacement of mechanical systems, new electrical infrastructure, and restoration of historic features that had deteriorated over time. Just months into the renovation, the region was struck by a significant earthquake. It occurred in the late afternoon, shaking buildings across the city, cracking masonry, and toppling structures that had stood for decades. The hotel, empty at the time, suffered considerable damage. Steel beams bent, walls cracked. The very spaces workers had begun to restore were now compromised. The parallels to the past were impossible to ignore. A disaster had once destroyed the original hotel during an era of transformation. Now, in another moment of architectural redefinition, the hotel faced a new test. Engineers returned to the site with renewed urgency. They reinforced damaged beams, revised plans, and expanded the scope of the retrofit. What had been a renovation became a reconstruction effort, one that required far more resources than originally anticipated. Costs soared, schedules extended, but public support remained strong. Residents remembered the fire that had destroyed the first hotel. They remembered how the city had rebuilt in defiance of loss. They understood that the structure represented more than history. It represented perseverance. Work continued for years. The retrofit involved installing steel bracing deep within the building, anchoring it to reinforced foundations, integrating shock-absorbing joints, and redesigning mechanical systems to withstand future seismic events. Electricians installed miles of new wiring. Plumbers replaced entire networks of pipes. Craftsmen restored marble columns, polished terrazzo floors, and cleaned decorative stone that had accumulated a century of soot and wear. One of the most delicate tasks involved reassembling the glass ceiling of the dining hall. Artisans cleaned, repaired, and replaced individual pieces of glass. Each pane was set back into a new support framework designed to withstand vibrations that the original structure could never have imagined. The chandeliers, each weighing hundreds of pounds, were inspected and rewired. When they were finally rehung, their light captured the glass canopy in a dazzling display reminiscent of the hall's glory in the early 20th century. After years of reconstruction, the hotel reopened to extraordinary anticipation. Crowds gathered outside its entrance. Former employees returned to see the revitalized spaces. Guests stepped through the doors and gasped as sunlight filtered through the restored ceiling. The dining hall gleamed with renewed brilliance. The lobby, refurbished with careful precision, felt simultaneously historic and new. The reopening marked not just the completion of a renovation, but the preservation of a cultural identity. The hotel had endured two great disasters, one of fire, one of earthquake, and survived both through engineering, determination, and civic pride. Its continued existence became a testament to the idea that certain buildings transcend their material form, becoming part of the collective memory of a city. By the 21st century, the hotel's legacy had grown even more profound. It hosted international summits, major business conferences, and state visits. Celebrities stayed in its suites. Families celebrated weddings and milestones under its chandeliers. The hotel continued to evolve, integrating modern amenities while preserving the historical character that defined it. Yet, no matter how many decades passed, the story of its origin remained inseparable from its identity. The story of a Gilded Age palace built with impossible ambition, destroyed in a single night, and resurrected through the determination of a community that refused to let its symbol vanish. By the 2010s, the hotel had become one of the most studied historic structures in the country. Architectural students examined its seismic retrofitting methods. Historians traced its lineage back through layers of urban development, noting how the building reflected shifting philosophies about safety, luxury, and public space. Preservationists often cited it as a rare example of a Gilded Age legacy surviving intact into the modern era, rebuilt, reimagined, yet unmistakably rooted in a past defined by ambition and spectacle. Travelers continued to regard the hotel as a destination in itself. Many visited not just for accommodations, but to experience the building's storied architecture. The dining hall remained its most iconic feature. Morning light filtering through tens of thousands of glass panes cast intricate patterns across marble floors. The chandeliers glittered overhead, as mesmerizing as they had been a century earlier. Afternoon tea returned as a beloved tradition. Guests photographed the ceiling from every angle, fascinated by the interplay of glass, iron, and sunlight. It was not merely a room, it was an artifact of survival. The lobby, too, retained its significance. Guests moved beneath towering arches that had witnessed over a century of American history. Conversations between business leaders, diplomats, and artists carried the same weight they had in decades past. The lobby had become a chronicle of evolving culture, a place where each generation layered its own memories onto the marble floors. Older visitors spoke of their grandparents' experiences in the same spaces, creating a sense of continuity that few buildings in the nation could match. Despite its outward elegance, the hotel was not immune to the pressures of modern hospitality. Competition increased as new resorts and boutique hotels emerged. Consumer expectations shifted. Digital technology reshaped the industry. Yet the hotel stood firm, relying not on trends, but on the unparalleled experience it offered, an experience inseparable from its history. The management understood that the building's heritage was its greatest asset. Renovations were approached with the utmost care. When guest rooms were updated, craftsmen matched the original materials where possible. Carpets were woven to resemble historic patterns. Furniture was selected to reflect the building's early 20th century aesthetic. Even technological upgrades, necessary to maintain relevance, were concealed discreetly to preserve the visual integrity of each space. Throughout this period, the hotel hosted political speeches, international summits, and cultural events. Its guest lists read like a cross-section of modern history. Presidents continued to stay there, following the tradition set by their predecessors. Foreign dignitaries regarded the hotel as a symbol of American stability. Artists appreciated its architecture and often used it as a filming location or photographic backdrop. The city recognized the hotel as a historical anchor, a fixed point in a landscape constantly reshaped by development. Towers rose around it, but the hotel maintained its dignified presence, its proportions unchanged. Its silhouette became a reminder of the city's layered past, visible from blocks away amid modern glass structures. Residents often remarked that the hotel grounded the city visually and psychologically, offering a tangible link to earlier generations. Yet, the memory of the original building, the one that burned in a single night, never disappeared entirely. Local museums curated exhibits about its destruction. Newspapers published retrospectives on anniversaries of the fire. Photographs of its towering Victorian form were displayed in the hotel itself, juxtaposed with images of the ruins and the later reconstruction. Guests paused before these displays, struck by the contrast between the ornate exuberance of the original and the restrained elegance of its successor. The images served as reminders of impermanence and resilience, two forces woven deeply into the city's history. Discussions about the fire persisted among historians. They analyzed how quickly flames had traveled through the original's timber-framed attic. They noted the failures in the municipal water system. They examined the architectural hubris of the Gilded Age, a time when engineers believed that innovation alone could defy the laws of physics and fire. These analyses were not mere academic exercises. They shaped contemporary understanding of urban safety, influencing building codes across the region. Every few years, new articles appeared exploring different aspects of the tragedy. Some focused on the role of the fire brigade. Others examined first-hand accounts from guests who escaped with only seconds to spare. Others still reflected on the broader cultural consequences, arguing that the destruction of the hotel symbolized the end of an era defined more by spectacle than by caution. The hotel's existence in the 21st century thus carried a dual identity. It was both a modern luxury property and a memorial to a vanished landmark. It was a functioning business and a historical artifact. It was a place of daily activity and a repository of collective memory. Guests walked through its spaces not simply as travelers, but as participants in a story that began long before they arrived and would continue long after they left. For many residents, the hotel represented the city's most profound truth, that survival, not grandeur, defined its legacy. Fires would come, earthquakes would strike, economies would rise and fall, cultural values would change. Yet the city endured, and the hotel endured with it, evolving with each generation while preserving the lessons of those before. As the hotel entered its second century, the passage of time only deepened its significance. It was no longer merely a place where history had occurred. It was a place where history had accumulated. The building's walls contained a century's worth of layered stories, whispers of Gilded Age luxury, echoes of political negotiations, the soft footsteps of diplomats arriving for late-night meetings, the applause of dinners honoring statesmen, the quiet rituals of travelers seeking refuge after long journeys. Each generation added another layer, transforming the hotel into a living archive of the nation's social and political evolution. Preservationists increasingly viewed the hotel as one of the most important architectural survivors of its era. While countless Gilded Age structures had been demolished, either by disaster, neglect, or redevelopment, the hotel remained, embodying a continuity that other cities had lost. It represented not only a physical monument, but a symbolic one, a testament to the capacity of a community to rebuild, reimagine, and endure despite catastrophic loss. Visitors sensed this history, even if they did not know the specifics. Many remarked on the atmosphere, a subtle mixture of grandeur and gravity, as though the building itself remembered the events it had survived. They felt it in the long corridors lined with framed photographs, in the stillness of the early morning lobby, in the filtered light of the dining hall ceiling. It was not simply nostalgia, It was the presence of a story preserved in architecture. The hotel's staff understood this better than anyone. Multi-generational employees passed down traditions of service, teaching newcomers not only how to manage the practical routines of hospitality, but how to maintain the dignity the building required. Former employees often returned to visit, walking through the lobby with the ease of people who had lived through chapters of its history. Their stories became part of the institution's identity, reinforcing the sense that the hotel was more than a workplace. It was a cultural inheritance. As tourism evolved, the hotel adapted without losing its essence. It introduced new amenities, new technologies, and new dining concepts, yet always within the framework of its architectural heritage. Digital reservation systems were added discreetly. Conference rooms were updated with state-of-the-art equipment. Guest suites incorporated modern comforts, but the layout of each floor preserved the logic of the early 20th century plan. Even the sound of footsteps on the polished floors carried the soft resonance of an earlier era. The dining hall continued to draw admirers from around the world. Architectural publications frequently featured it in lists of the most beautiful public rooms in America. Photographers captured the shifting colors of daylight as it passed through the leaded glass ceiling. Fashion designers staged shoots beneath its chandeliers. Travelers spoke of the room with a reverence usually reserved for historic cathedrals. It had become one of the nation's most iconic interior spaces, recognized not only for its beauty, but for its resilience. In many ways, the dining hall symbolized the hotel's entire story. The original building had featured a winter garden, a bright, airy space where guests walked among palms and fountains. It had been destroyed completely in the fire, leaving only fragments of iron and broken glass scattered across smoking ruins. When the new hotel was constructed, the designers had paid tribute to the lost garden by transforming the central hall into a sunlit space framed by marble columns and crowned with glass. It became both a memorial and a rebirth, a space that acknowledged the past while creating something entirely new. The hotel's owners continued to invest in its preservation. They hired historians to document its evolution, archivists to collect photographs and letters, and artisans to maintain the original craftsmanship. They understood what the building meant to the city. It was not simply a business asset, but a public trust, a physical embodiment of identity and memory. From time to time, debates emerged about further modernization. Some argued for major renovations to compete with contemporary luxury hotels. Others argued that altering the building too drastically would erase the history that made it unique. In these debates, the story of the original hotel's destruction resurfaced. It reminded the city that grandeur without structural integrity was fragile, and that rebuilding had been possible only because the community valued the idea of preserving its cultural anchors. The hotel also became a touchstone during moments of civic challenge. Economic recessions, political conflicts, and social upheavals all unfolded in the city around it, yet the hotel remained steady. Residents often cited it as a symbol of stability, a reassurance that the city, no matter how much it changed, still held onto its roots. During difficult times, people gravitated toward the building's familiar facade, finding comfort in the idea that something so deeply connected to the city's past could remain standing. Throughout the 21st century, the hotel's guest register continued to read like a condensed history of international affairs. Heads of state stayed in its suites during summits. Business magnates held private meetings in its parlors. Artists and authors sought inspiration within its walls. Newlyweds posed for photographs beneath the dining hall ceiling. Families returned for anniversaries, recalling grandparents who had first visited in the 1920s or 1930s. The building became a bridge between personal memory and public history. Even as the hotel aged, it remained unmistakably alive. It breathed with the activity of its guests, its staff, its events, and its rituals. Yet beneath all of this, one story continued to define its legacy. The night the Gilded Age's Grandest hotel was reduced to ashes, and the decades-long effort to rebuild not just a structure, but a symbol. Over time, the story of the original hotel's destruction became inseparable from the identity of the rebuilt one. It was not simply an architectural footnote or a dramatic anecdote. It became the lens through which generations understood the city's relationship to ambition, risk, and resilience. Teachers used the fire as a case study in engineering. Historians referenced it in their exploration of the Gilded Age. Journalists drew parallels between the disaster and other moments of civic vulnerability. The hotel became both symbol and lesson. In local classrooms, photographs of the original structure were displayed beside images of the ruins. Students compared the elaborate Victorian towers with the skeletal remains left by the fire. They learned how concealed timber, hidden voids, and insufficient water pressure had contributed to the tragedy. They learned how the rebuilding effort had reshaped building codes and influenced fire safety standards across the region. What had once been a towering emblem of extravagance became a cautionary tale, a reminder that progress must be grounded in durability. Architects visited the hotel as part of their training, studying its careful proportions, its structural reinforcements, and the meticulous craftsmanship that went into its reconstruction. They traced the evolution of design from the ornate exuberance of the original structure to the disciplined elegance of the new one. They examined how a building born from tragedy could embody a new architectural philosophy, one that valued integrity as much as spectacle. Visitors sensed these layers of meaning even if they did not know the details. They felt it in the gravity of the lobby, in the way conversation softened beneath the high ceilings, in the way footsteps echoed along polished floors that had supported generations. There was a quiet majesty to the building, an unspoken acknowledgement that it was more than the sum of its materials. It had survived loss. It had witnessed transformation. It had become a witness to time. The dining hall remained the clearest expression of this layered history. Guests who entered for the first time often stopped in the doorway, overwhelmed by the light, the height, the stillness. The room had the rare ability to elevate the ordinary. A morning cup of tea felt ceremonial. Breakfast became a moment of reflection. The architecture compelled visitors to slow down, to look upward, to feel the presence of history in their own lives. Wedding ceremonies, diplomatic receptions, and state functions all unfolded beneath its glass canopy. Leaders from across the world delivered speeches there, their words amplified by the room's acoustics and magnified by its symbolism. Each event added to the room's legacy, transforming it into a stage where private memory and public history intertwined. Despite economic fluctuations, natural disasters, and shifting cultural trends, the hotel maintained its prominence. It became a fixture in travel literature, a favorite among architectural critics, and a touchstone for residents who traced their own family histories through its halls. The building appeared in films, novels, and photography books, often portrayed as a timeless sanctuary amid the city's evolving skyline. Yet beneath its visible elegance, the hotel continued to adapt. Its mechanical systems were upgraded again and again. Its structural supports were reinforced as engineering standards evolved. Its preservation required constant vigilance. Every decade brought new challenges: regulatory changes, technological advances, shifts in tourism, the pressures of urban development. Yet, through each challenge, the hotel's owners reaffirmed their commitment to preserving its historical core. They understood what the building represented, not merely the success of a business, but the continuity of a city's identity. As the hotel moved deeper into the 21st century, it also became a refuge in times of crisis. During regional emergencies, it provided stability to travelers unable to return home. During economic downturns, its lights continued to glow even as other establishments darkened. Families gathered there during moments of grief, finding comfort in its quiet and predictability. The hotel became part of the emotional infrastructure of the city, an anchor during uncertain times. Preservationists worked tirelessly to ensure its protection. They petitioned for historic designations, documented architectural details, and conducted research into the origins of materials used during the reconstruction. Their efforts ensured that the hotel remained not just functional, but historically accurate, an achievement increasingly rare in modern cities. In return, the building rewarded their devotion with its endurance. Visitors from other countries often expressed amazement that a hotel of such age and significance survived in a region prone to natural disasters. They marveled at the engineering required to sustain it through earthquakes and storms. They admired the craftsmanship that continued to shine through each restored surface. For many travelers, the hotel became a window into America's architectural evolution, evidence of a nation's capacity to rebuild after devastation. Yet for residents, the hotel meant something more intimate. It symbolized their city's refusal to surrender to catastrophe. The fire had once destroyed the grandest hotel of the Gilded Age in a single night, but the city rebuilt. An earthquake, decades later, damaged the successor, but again, the city restored it. The hotel stood as proof that identity, once forged, could be preserved through determination. The story of the original hotel's destruction became a ritual of civic memory. Each generation learned it anew. Local newspapers recounted it on anniversaries. Families passed it down as part of the city's lore. It was a reminder that progress carried risks, that ambition demanded responsibility, and that beauty, no matter how monumental, was never invulnerable. Every evening, as lights illuminated the glass ceiling of the dining hall and the lobby filled with quiet conversation, the hotel demonstrated a truth the city had learned over a century earlier, that the most enduring symbols are not those untouched by disaster, but those rebuilt in the aftermath. As the hotel advanced into its third century of existence, it carried with it an extraordinary dual legacy. One, built on triumph, the other on loss. Its identity was inseparable from the story of destruction that had preceded it. Every guest who walked through its doors participated, knowingly or not, in a continuum of memory rooted in both resilience and reinvention. The hotel remained a monument not only to architectural achievement, but to the persistence of a city that refused to be defined by disaster. The original hotel had captivated the nation at a moment when America's wealth seemed limitless. Its sheer scale embodied the audacity of an age powered by railroads, steam, and speculation. Its destruction, sudden and total, revealed the fragility behind that spectacle. It exposed the gaps in technology, the vulnerabilities of rapid urban development, and the limits of 19th-century engineering. When the flames consumed its towers, they also consumed an era's illusions of invincibility. The rebuilt hotel, in contrast, reflected a new set of values: discipline, stability, and endurance. Its design emphasized strength over ornament, safety over spectacle. Yet it retained enough elegance to evoke the memory of the original. In form and purpose, it bridged 2 centuries of architectural philosophy. It became a physical narrative of what the city had lost and what it had learned. Over time, the hotel also became a place where the city confronted its own transformation. The surrounding skyline evolved dramatically as decades passed. Glass towers rose around the historic structure, reflecting sunlight onto its stone facade. New districts developed, reshaping the city's geography. The boardwalk expanded, introducing entertainment complexes and modern resorts. The hotel remained at the center of this shifting landscape, a rare constant amid continual change. Visitors often commented on this juxtaposition. They admired the way the hotel's restrained architecture contrasted with the sharp angles of nearby modern buildings. Some remarked that the hotel felt like an anchor, an architectural reminder of the city's origins amid the upward sweep of 21st-century development. Others described it as a sanctuary, a place where time seemed to slow despite the bustling activity outside its doors. Its most enduring presence, however, remained the dining hall. Generations of guests experienced their first moments in the room with the same sense of wonder. Light, passing through the restored glass ceiling, cast shifting patterns across the marble that felt almost alive. The chandeliers glowed with a warmth that softened every detail. The room's acoustics transformed even quiet conversations into a gentle murmur. Travelers from distant countries often paused at the threshold before entering, struck by the feeling that they were stepping into a space defined as much by memory as by design. Some guests knew the full story. Many did not, but all sensed the significance of the room, even without the words to articulate it. The hotel continued to host moments of historical importance. Presidential motorcades pulled up to its entrance. International delegations met behind closed doors. World-renowned performers stayed in its suites during tours. Writers found inspiration in its quiet corners. Couples celebrated engagements, anniversaries, and milestones beneath its chandeliers. Visitors traveled across oceans to experience its architecture firsthand. With every passing year, the line between the building's historical identity and its practical operation grew increasingly intertwined. The hotel was not simply an artifact preserved in time, it was a living institution shaped by constant use. Its significance lay not only in what it had endured, but in what it continued to offer, a sense of continuity in a world defined by change. Residents often reflected on what the hotel symbolized. For some, it represented the resilience of their city. For others, it was a reminder of the consequences of unchecked ambition. Others still saw it as proof that heritage could be preserved through thoughtful stewardship. But for most, the hotel stood as a quiet reassurance, an architectural constant that had weathered upheaval, loss, and renewal. As new generations grew up, they learned the story of the night the original hotel burned. They learned how the fire had transformed the city. They learned how the rebuilding effort had shaped modern architecture. And they learned how the existing hotel stood as a testament to everything the city had overcome. The story became part of the collective identity of the region, a shared memory passed down through families, classrooms, and workplaces. Despite its importance, the hotel avoided becoming a museum. It remained alive with activity, grounded in the present while honoring the past. Guests continued to check in, experience its spaces, and contribute their own stories to the building's ongoing narrative. No matter how many decades passed, the hotel's essence remained constant. It was a place where memory and modernity coexisted with rare harmony. And yet, beneath its quiet grandeur, one truth defined its existence above all others. The hotel owed its very life to the loss of its predecessor. Without the fire that destroyed the original structure, the new one would never have been built. Without the tragedy, the triumph of the rebuilt hotel, its endurance, its beauty, its symbolic power, would not have carried the same meaning. In the end, the story of the Gilded Age's Grandest hotel is not simply a story about architecture. It is a story about a city learning, failing, rebuilding, and redefining itself across generations. It is a story about ambition taken to its limits, about the fragility of even the most magnificent creations, and about the determination that emerges when a community refuses to let disaster define its legacy. The first hotel rose at a moment when America believed in the limitless power of its wealth. It embodied the optimism of an age, convinced that engineering could subdue nature and that beauty could be built on an unprecedented scale. It was celebrated as a triumph of innovation, a marvel of craftsmanship, a symbol of civic pride. And for a time, it fulfilled those promises. Visitors walked its halls with awe. Newspapers declared it the greatest hotel of its time. The city embraced it as proof that it had joined the ranks of the world's elite destinations. And then, in a single night, it was gone. Flames consumed the towers that had once dominated the shoreline. Firelight colored the sky. Crowds gathered helplessly as the structure collapsed into itself. For days afterward, residents wandered the ruins, trying to reconcile the enormity of what had been lost. The city faced not only the destruction of a building, but the collapse of a symbol central to its identity. The tragedy revealed the vulnerabilities of the age, exposing the consequences of overconfidence and the limits of 19th-century fire safety. But the city did not accept defeat. From the ashes of the original hotel rose a new one, stronger, safer, more disciplined, and more enduring. It reflected a shift in architectural values and a growing understanding of engineering responsibility. Its builders learned from past failures, constructing a structure meant to last not decades, but centuries. The new hotel became a celebration of resilience, proof that the city could rebuild with greater wisdom and renewed ambition. Over the next century, the hotel welcomed presidents, statesmen, diplomats, artists, and families. It became the site of negotiations that shaped national policy, the backdrop for celebrations that marked personal milestones, and the setting for ordinary moments transformed by the quiet majesty of its architecture. It stood firm through economic downturns, cultural revolutions, and natural disasters. Each time the city changed, the hotel adapted, continuing to offer a sense of continuity that linked the present to the past. As the hotel entered its modern era, its legacy became clear. It was not merely the successor to a destroyed landmark. It was the embodiment of everything the city had learned from its history: the triumphs, the failures, the innovations, and the resilience. It represented the idea that endurance is not the absence of loss, but the refusal to be defined by it. Visitors who step through its doors today experience more than a luxury hotel. They enter a space shaped by memory, memory of what once stood there, memory of how it was lost, and memory of how the city rebuilt. They walk through rooms that reflect both the aspirations of a bygone century and the engineering precision of a modern one. They dine beneath light filtered through glass that has survived earthquakes, storms, and decades of change. They sleep in rooms supported by steel that anchors the building deep into the earth. They participate in a story still unfolding. The hotel stands now as the most enduring symbol of its city's identity. It is the last great witness to an era defined by spectacle, ambition, and transformation. It is a reminder that beauty can be rebuilt, that history can be preserved, and that a community's character is often forged in its response to catastrophe. The grandest hotel of the Gilded Age may have been destroyed in a single night, but the legacy it created has lasted for generations. And so, more than a century after the fire that should have ended its story, the hotel still rises above the shoreline, quietly, confidently, unbroken. Its lights glow each evening as they have for 100 years. Its dining hall still fills with voices and the rustle of linen. Its lobby still bears witness to the footsteps of travelers from around the world. The building remains a monument, not just to what was built, but to what was rebuilt. The Gilded Age gave the hotel its beginning, the fire gave it its meaning, and time gave it its endurance. The palace that once vanished in flames has, in the end, survived longer than anyone could have imagined,